Joining me now is Kirsten Zickfeld. She is a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. She's an associate professor at Simon Fraser University, and that's where we have reached her. Ms. Zickfeld, thank you very much. Professor Zickfeld, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You have, this report is, people are still trying to digest it because as always with the IPCC reports, it's huge and its call to action is very big. You're calling for immediate action, it's major action if we're going to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees. What kind of action are you calling for? What would it look like?
So you're absolutely correct that this would require action at an unprecedented scale and also on a very rapid timeline. And actually, we need an across-the-board approach. So in order to achieve limiting warming below 1.5 degrees, we need actions across all sectors of society and the economy. So just to touch on a few examples, we will need the way that we produce and consume energy. So this means decarbonizing our energy supply, so switch to renewables, phase out coal entirely, also significantly reduce our consumption of oil and natural gas. It also means changing the way that we move around, so deep transformations and the kind of car we use. So here we have to move towards electrification and flight travel. So we'll have to reconsider how much we actually fly. We may choose to use different means of transportations over the car, for example, to getting to places. And this would also require to reimagine our cities. So the design of our cities, how we move around in cities. It would also affect buildings, so we need to improve energy efficiency. We need to make sure that when we heat or cool our buildings, we use renewable forms of energy and do not rely on fossil fuels. So really massive changes across the board, which I think will deeply influence the way we live.
Well, that begs the question. When you go and talk to members of the general public and friends and family, and you lay out that scope of things, what kind of a response do you get from people?
Well, I think what is very important for people to understand is that if we do not act, then the costs will be way greater. So the costs of inaction and of not tackling climate change would be massive. So if climate change proceeds on its current trajectory, we will cross 1.5 and by 2040. So this would be around 30 years from now. And after, so things, I mean, at 1.5, it's not a safe future. So we're already seeing impact now, and these impacts will continue to worsen as we move towards 1.5. But as we move past 1.5, then we're getting into territory where it will become very difficult to actually cope with some of the impacts and adapt to the impacts of climate change. So I think what is very important to realize is that if we do nothing, then the costs and the damage to the way we live will be much greater than if we actually tackle this problem. And also fighting climate change has a number of benefits. So if we think air pollution, for example, so there are millions of premature deaths worldwide due to air pollution. And by getting rid of fossil fuels, we would also address that problem.
You're calling on countries to cut their carbon emissions by 45% from 2010 levels, a 45% cut by 2030. Has any country committed to those kind of reductions?
Well, so 196 countries signed on to the Paris Agreement. So what the Paris Agreement states is that the signatory nations pursue the goal of limiting warming to 2 degrees and pursue efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. So this is what countries signed on to. And I think for 2 degrees, there was a lot of research out there, so they had an idea of the scale of the challenge. And I think they also understood that 1.5 would be more challenging than 2. So really a daunting task. So I think when they signed the Paris Agreement, even though they did not know what the specific would be or what the blueprint is, I think sort of the scale of the problem or of the challenge was known.
Is that part of the problem, though, in the sense that a lot of people have already criticized the Paris Agreement because they say the Paris Agreement member states around the world don't really even have plans, and Canada's included, that would even get them to the Paris Agreement, and then the Paris Agreement doesn't really even have modalities or plans for getting to 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the point. So if we're looking at what countries submitted under the Paris Agreement, so the pledges they submitted, they're actually insufficient to limit warming to 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees. And so what the Paris Agreement has as a mechanism, so that it asks countries to ratchet up their ambition as time progresses and as these policies turn out to be insufficient. But yes, this is a major problem that climate targets are weak. So here in Canada, we're now looking at the 30% reduction by 2030 from 2007 levels, which compared to the 55% from 2010 is insufficient. And then in addition to that, we're nowhere near meeting this target. So what we really need here is very strong political leadership that puts in place the pricing mechanisms on carbon and also the regulations that really initiate the shift away from fossil fuels.
Do you feel sometimes like you're really pushing a very heavy rock up and uphill because, as you just mentioned, Canada is not even on target to reach its 30% commitment. You're asking for a 45% commitment. So Canada and other nations aren't even on target for the modest commitments.
Yes, it has been frustrating. So as a scientist, we've been talking about climate change for 30 years now, and we have been asking for action, and little bit has happened since. Despite the signals of hope here and there, like the Paris Agreement, but what I found what gives me hope is that with this report, for the first time, we put out a blueprint or a roadmap how this 1.5 degrees can be achieved, and we put out a toolkit in terms of some of the policies, the finance mechanisms, the scale of the technological transition that's required, and so now it is on policymakers to take this on and act.
I have to ask you, I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, I mean, from year to year, it assembles hundreds and hundreds of prominent scientists, and they all sign on to this. You're here in Canada, you're watching the Canadian government, and you're watching Canadian politicians. Right now, we're having a Donnybrook, we're having a big argument about whether or not to even impose a carbon pricing system. As a scientist involved in this, is it disheartening? What do you make of the debate that we're seeing politically now over even modest measures?
Yes, it is absolutely disheartening. And again, referring to what I said earlier, I think one of the major challenges here is that the perception of, or people perceive what needs to be done to tackle climate change to be worse than what is required to let's say, live with climate change and adapt to the change. And I think that that's a profound misconception. So if we don't do anything, then we're really headed for disaster. We look at the planet, which has no resemblance with the planet that we're living on currently. And I think we need to realize that without addressing this problem, we'll be in a much worse place than if we take serious actions about it.
I have to ask you something as a scientist. I mean, you were there in British Columbia, and you've just had a tremendously devastating summer of fires, of forest fires and wildfires. We now see a hurricane hitting the east coast of the United States. But a lot of people say, well, we can't associate one event with the climate change. We can't associate causally one particular event with these trends. What do you say to them?
I would say that in the past few years, the science has made tremendous progress on that. And now, actually, since you bring up hurricanes, sort of even though we cannot say a single hurricane is caused by climate change, what we can say is that some of the rainfall that comes with hurricanes, or we can say what percentage of that rainfall is actually due to the warming planet. So for Florence, there has been a study which was released sort of soon after the hurricane. So this is now a few weeks ago, which showed that 40 to 50% of the heavy rainfall that came with this hurricane can be associated with the very warm sea surface temperature in the Atlantic Ocean. So I think in terms of science, we've made a lot of headways in terms of understanding what the contribution of climate warming to these extreme events is. And what we can say unequivocally is that climate change has made heat waves worse. It has made heavy rain events worse. In terms of hurricanes, what we're seeing is that they dump more rain on places, which has to do with the fact that the atmosphere can hold more water vapor. Also, they move more slowly, and which means that they persist longer over specific areas, increasing the damage. And then on top of that, the storm surge is higher because it's on top of already rising sea level.
Okay, last question. Once again, a personal question as a scientist involved in this kind of work. How does one remain optimistic when you look at the other species, the human beings, and how they're reacting or not reacting to this?
So I think the good news is that we have the technological tools. So we have the technology out there that would allow us to really address the climate change problem. So the cost of renewables has decreased dramatically over the past decade. Storage has become so energy storage has become cheaper and sort of better, and we need this in order to store energy. Let's say when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing, and so we have sort of we know how to electrify our vehicles. I think a lot of the technology is out there, and this gives me hope. And with regard to the political will, which is the main thing that is lacking, I hope that this report will be a wake-up call.
Okay, well, Kirsten Zickfeld, thank you very much for speaking with us. Thanks for sharing the results of this latest report.
You are very welcome. Thank you.